And you are listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host Mark, who had the fantastic idea of doing a November schedule of doing all the phantasms. So this is my fault if y'all don't like it.
I'm your other co-host, Josh, with lots of weird trivia facts about this very strange movie. And I am the one that had the brilliant idea of bringing our guest on and introducing him to this very surreal nightmare of these movies, Mr. Andy Morva from Love What I Love podcast.
Hey, welcome. Happy to be here. And freaked out by these movies a little bit. Not gonna lie. I'm a fresh baby to the Phantasm series.
Well, the whole thing started was we had the bands on, was it last
Gone
month or the month
cold.
before? And they wanted to do the first Phantasm. And in the process of getting ready for it, I found the collection for like 20 bucks, 18 bucks. I was like, hey,
Nice.
Josh, we should get these and just do like the other 4 sequels as a month of episodes. And we're here now, and you had to suffer through it with us.
But I also have to give credit to the Gone Cold, who are our guests for that episode, because as we kept talking about the first film, I had so many questions about the first film. Go listen to the episode, but like Steve and Mark just kind of kept getting off on these like rabbit trails of like the sequels and the mythology, and that also was kind of what pushed us to be like, you know what, we're just gonna do Phantasm November, because at that point we had all of October already planned out. Um, but Andy, I am so curious to hear your thoughts on this, because this, like I said in the first episode, I feel like Phantasm is a deep cut horror franchise that you only really know about if you're in the fan of the genre. And this was a first time viewing for you. So what did you think of the first film? And then we'll talk about the second film.
The first one kind of in a lot of ways blew me away, and I'm a little bummed I didn't watch this earlier in my life. I always knew about Phantasm mainly because I was 12 when Bubba Hotep came out. And I don't know if you guys have
Mm.
seen that movie.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
You guys are making me feel old again.
My bad, Mark. Anyway, sorry, I'll rephrase it. It was the year 2002 when Bubba Hotep came out, and that was 21 years, or was it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
21
yeah,
years
Yeah,
21
ago.
years
21.
ago. So you could do the math. And I love that movie, and I saw it a bunch, and I watched the director commentary. So like, I was into how do you say his name? Don Casarelli, the director
Yeah,
and
I think
writer of
so.
these.
Mm.
He wrote and directed that movie, so I was into him. And then they made a bunch of Phantasm jokes throughout the commentary, I remember, and I was like, oh, so this guy has a previous franchise, and that's where it ended. Never looked into it. I'll be honest, I don't want to insult you, Josh, because I know how much you love Hellraiser. I'm not really into those movies.
Sure.
In my mind, I always put Phantasm next to Hellraiser, where it was going to be like a weird magic gore movie that I just wasn't going to be that into. But now having seen it, I was so wrong. It's definitely got some pacing stuff, especially in the first half. But that first movie was filled with fantastic gore effects, a really cool mythology, a sick villain, and some dream sequences that were like unmatched. And honestly, I don't know. I didn't listen to your guys' episodes, so I don't know where you fell on it. But I loved the ending, the dream ending. A lot of times that's corny. I thought it worked really well for that first movie. But so yeah, I was impressed.
Yeah, I actually also really I went back and rewatched it because it had been probably like almost 2 months since we've done that episode, and went back and rewatched the first Phantasm. And this is the third time I've seen it this year because I watched it earlier this year for out of curiosity. And I every time I come back to this movie, I always end up loving it more.
Yeah, you
Um,
catch little things that you
yeah,
miss.
like
Like
there were.
everybody knows the tall man from the series
Mhm.
who's a horror fan. Whether you know the
Oh,
movies in general, whether you know the movies or not, everybody recognizes the tall man and everybody
mhm.
recognizes the fentanyl.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
like one of the things that like I caught was like I there were so many details that I had overlooked before we recorded with Gone Cold. And so I would be sitting there and like see something on the screen and be like, oh, that's something that Mark alluded to when we recorded, or that's something that Steve brought up and we missed. And like
yeah.
there are so many details that a lot like Andy, I'm glad you brought like Hellraiser. Hellraiser has a lot of like really intricate details. The first film, they after that has become it's neither here nor there. You either love them or you don't. But
Hellraiser takes over the internet or whatever.
yeah, whole world. But yeah, it's really intricate. So like I felt like that was my relationship with Hellraiser. Like I had to watch it multiple times to really appreciate what Clive Barker was doing. And that's what I feel like I've finally in a groove now with these series that like when Mark was like we should do this series, I was like, God, why do you hate me? And going back and like rewatching the first film, I was like, man, I was like, I I'm really mad that like I slept on this because this movie is like it's a genius and it's coming out in this like it's really interesting that the timing of this coming because this came out in 1979. So like horror around this time was like felt very slasher heavy. And like then you have like some offshoots like when we covered earlier late last year like When a Stranger Calls came out the same year, but this is kind of that weird in between where we haven't gotten Hellraiser yet. So this blend of sci-fi mythology and horror hadn't really existed yet. Phantasm was kind of ahead of the curve in a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, we were starting to get it from like Halloween.
Mhm.
Halloween was like the first one that was like an actual story driven, real story driven kind of slasher. The others, anything before that kind of was, but it was more
Sure.
of an afterthought. Where this is actually dealing, like they make references to how old the tall man is,
Mhm.
like with pictures from like the Civil War and junk.
Yeah, that moving picture was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to the movie, but the way it's told, it can be a little confusing without watching it a few times.
Yeah. And I feel like I appreciate storytellers that do that where like if you watch a movie once, like it's you either love it or you hate it, but like there's obviously like room for like things that you discover. Like as we're recording this, like I'm wearing a Twin Peaks shirt, and like David Lynch is like notorious for doing movies like this. Why he's my favorite director. Like you watch Mulholland Drive, and every time you watch it, there's something different. Every time you watch, Fire Walk with Me, there's something different that you're picking up on, and that is just the makings of a great storytelling. And I think that Don Castelletti or Filoni or however you say his name, like is a masterful storyteller because of films like Phantasm.
Yeah, I have a quick question. So, how familiar were you guys with the rest of the series, and have you seen it yet up to this point, or are you watching them for the first time for this?
This is my first time.
Okay, and Mark, you've seen them?
So I've seen one a couple times and I've seen three, I think twice, because the second
Uh,
one isn't streaming anywhere,
I know I hit
which
to
is
rent it.
so
It,
weird.
it was pretty frustrating where I was like, every single one is streaming, and then I was like, well, there's my $4 for Phantasm 2.
It's
Guys,
it's
the
it,
sa
I think it's a rights thing.
you think so?
Somebody I don't see any other reason that one, three, four, and five are all streaming and two isn't, other
Guy-
than maybe somebody else owns it.
Guys, this is a side tangent and it's quick, but it's a conspiracy theory. Because I was trying to watch the Purge movies last year, and every Purge was streaming except for part two. So I watched the first one and then stopped. This year, I saw two was streaming, and now they're all streaming except for part three. My conspiracy theory is they put full series out, but they leave one out to incentivize you to rent it because you're gonna start the series and get all into it, and then you have to stop, and then you're gonna, all right, I'll pay $4. It's probably not true, but it's my conspiracy theory.
No, I can get behind that. I think
Yeah,
it is.
and
But
I think
here's a fun trivia fact for you. So Wellgo, our friends over at Wellgo Entertainment, they own all of the rights to these now. They've released a great box set a few years ago. But this is actually this film was actually released by Universal, and it was actually the lowest budget horror film or actually any film that Universal produced in the 80s.
we're
Phantasm
talking
2.
Phantasm 2.
So
In-
Phantasm
Interesting.
2 was owned by somebody else.
It was eventually like so I don't remember. I think Phantasm 1 was, if I remember correctly, was an independent release.
I would
Um,
imagine.
whereas this one is owned by Universal. Um, there like Orion gets involved at some point. So like this is a series that is like kind of bounced around from like different studios. I think the fifth one was like straight to video or like
I thought I read
The fifth,
three and four were straight to video. I thought I read that
yeah,
online. I
5
think
was a limited release.
oh
yes.
well,
So
I
I think this is the
probably
only one that was like a Hollywood movie, like like a big budget release by a studio.
yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
should we? Yeah.
Let's jump into Phantasm 2. Um Mark, since this was your baby, what are your thoughts on this movie?
So I watched it earlier this week, and the issue I had was it was one of those nights where I just couldn't really focus on anything. So I had a hard time watching it. But overall, it's another entry, and for some reason, I kind of liked it better than the first, and it may have been the introduction of a new Sentinel.
I'm gonna echo that. I think this movie is. I'm gonna say a statement that might come across a little controversial. Uh,
It's a little more
in
coherent story wise.
yeah. So this movie to me feels like the relationship to like Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, where like when you watch Evil, they feel like they're made by the same people, but they operate almost completely different genres. Whereas the first one leans a lot more into like fantasy and psychological. This one feels almost like a road trip, vengeance kind of action movie that also pays homage to those horror roots.
With some
And
body horror.
yeah, that was kind of my takeaway with this. But like the more that this movie got into it, like structurally, it structurally reminded me of kind of like the Evil Dead, but like narratively it reminded me of like Twin Peaks and like David Lynch movies.
Yeah, I could see what you're saying. I definitely saw the Evil Dead 2 kind of DNA in this one. Even down to, I don't know if you guys, we'll talk about Easter eggs later, but there's a little Sam Raimi name drop in there.
Yes.
The Sentinel knocking down the doors felt to me just like Ash running through the cabin. So I felt the DNA of that too. So I don't know if I can fully get agree with you guys though. I definitely don't think this is better than the first one. I think the first one, even though it was harder to follow, I think it just like the 3 acts actually worked as a full movie with like a kid with a character arc. This one just was a great sequel. I thought it kind of just the gore was obviously bigger and better. The kills were insane. The last chunk of this movie was some of the most fun I've had watching something in a long time. But I do think it meanders a little bit in the middle. And overall, I kind of missed the dream surreal aspect of the first one, and they were just kind of, this one was like, let's get a little more guns, let's get a little more whatever, a little more kills, a little more sentinels, which is all awesome, but I don't think it makes it a better movie. But it is very, very, very fun, and I liked it a lot.
they're they almost operate like they're obviously you're getting callbacks to the first film, obviously like Mike's relationship with the tall man and kind of expanding that world that he's not the only one with this psychic connection. You get more of the dwarfs in this movie, you get more of like the little like sphere things, like this is the first time that you actually like in the last little bit of this movie you actually get to like go to the tall man's world, which
Well, they
my,
showed it a little bit the first one too.
they did, but you actually kind of get to see more of it. Like there's an actual like legit sequence. Like the first one, when you go to the tall man's world, it feels like almost like a blink and you miss it kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, you actually have like creatures that are like crawling out. But Andy, here is a fun trivia fact for you that this film's budget was $3 million, and it
Uh-huh.
was 10 times the budget of the original Phantasm.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And it also is reserved to be the biggest one in the series, which would make sense if the rest are direct to video.
Yeah. How did you guys feel about the way they made this a sequel? Because obviously if you take the first one at face value with the dream ending, I know there's the slasher ending where he comes out at the very end, but this kind of has to undo that idea. So, but it kind of has a foot in both worlds, where when it starts, we continue right off the ending of the first movie, which I thought was a very bold choice because this dude aged 10 years and now we're cutting from footage from 10 years ago to Reggie now. And it was a little hard to keep track of how old he was.
Well, he was also, it's almost like the events of the first movie landed him in an asylum because nobody wanted to believe him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, but the idea was that because if you remember the end of the first movie, like Reggie dies, his brother's dying, and then he wakes up and it's a dream. And then he goes upstairs and then the tall man gets him. And then this movie picks up right from where that picks off. And then he goes to the asylum. And then when he comes out, Reggie doesn't believe that any of this happened. So the idea was if Reggie doesn't remember it, then it kind of was a dream. But then since the tall man's real, it kind of was real. I thought it was a weird, it didn't really tie for me like the sequel aspect. The first 20 minutes of this, I was like, that's what we're doing? Like, I don't know. Does that make sense to you guys? Because
Yeah. So
they're kind of
go
claiming it
ahead,
was a
Mark.
dream, but at the same time, everything happened, but it
So
didn't.
we were going into it with somebody explaining to us some of the mythology beforehand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like the what was his name? Was his name Reggie, the kid from the first one?
Nah,
No, the first one is Mike.
Michael.
Mike.
Yeah,
So
Reggie's
Mike,
the
Okay.
bald guy.
yeah, yeah.
So he the kid that's in the asylum, whatever his
Yeah,
name is.
Mike.
Mike.
Yeah.
Mike, okay. We were told that he shares some of the same like abilities that the tall man has.
Mhm.
And
Uh-huh.
that's part of why the tall man is after him, which is why he knew that certain events in the second movie were like ambushes almost, or he's going to be here, or we need to save these people, and they'd get there just as things were taking place, is because he had some sort of connection either to that world or to the tall man himself. So that might have made it make a little more sense and tie together a little better.
So yeah, so that's the way that that speaking from like a modern horror perspective, like have either of you guys seen the Terrifier films?
Nah.
Scene one. Haven't
Okay,
seen the second
so
one yet.
the at the end of the first film, or the way that they counteract, because the first film feels really final. So obviously they're in the process of making a third one now. So, but the second one kind of like makes Art the Clown kind of like a supernatural being. This is not really a spoiler, but like the final girl that we follow in the film has like a mysterious like connection and like tie to him that is very reminiscent of like the tall man and Mike's relationship. And so
Yeah.
the way that like I looked at it, because I also they re-released Terrifier 2 in theaters, and so I watched it, went saw it, and then watched this like back to back, basically. Um, the way that like I took it as it's not necessarily this like undoing. They are essentially like trying to, kind of leave it open for interpretation. Like when you I feel like when you watch like some, Nolan films, or like I keep coming back to David Lynch, but there's a lot of like that's a very Lynchian trope, is kind of leaving the film kind of like feel open-ended, and like also be at a place where it, you know, is it a dream? Was it not a dream? And I think that's to me is kind of part of the allure of this series, is that like it very much feels like it operates both as a dream and not as a dream, because in the beginning Reggie doesn't believe him, and then his house blows up with his family inside as Mike is predicting it like 2 seconds later, and then he kind of comes around and they go out and hunt the tall man.
Yeah, I get all that. I just found it a weird choice to make him not believe him in the beginning, because then that kind of proves the idea would be then that the whole first movie is a vision that he sees that all happening and he knows the tall man exists, then goes upstairs and meets the tall man for the first time. Because later Reggie says, like, I didn't blow my house up, like we didn't fight a bunch of gremlins in my house. So it just threw me off. I just thought it was a pretty wild way to make a sequel. To but yeah, that was just my thoughts when it first started.
Yeah, I took it more of he was in denial than it didn't really happen.
Who?
Well,
The
Reggie. Reggie,
Yeah.
bald guy.
But his
Yeah.
house was
So
still there. That was the whole thing where he's like, you told me I blew up my house and I didn't do that. Like
yeah, I
I
think
don't know.
also too, like, one of the things that I hinted about in the first episode, when we discussed Phantasm, was the first one, is that the whole like dream sequence is like the fact that he wakes up at the end and he's like, yeah, he's like, I had this like dream about Jody, and he's like explaining it to Reg, and it feels almost kind of like this like really elongated like metaphor for grief, like, being a young age and
For
like not
sure.
really knowing how to process something as traumatic as losing brother, not just a brother, but like someone that you're extremely close to.
I may not have been
um
in grief over losing that Hemikuda, but that's just me.
But no,
but
I agree with you. I think that's why that first movie, I think that's why I think it's a better movie, because I took it as there was never a monster or a tall man. This was just a kid who lost both his parents, then his brother, and then made up this elaborate story because it
I,
helped his brain cope.
Yeah, I think for the first film, like it's Mike's like going through grief, and when we meet Reggie in this film, it's like him still processing the grief of losing like a best friend, because like they also lost a friend at the beginning of the first film, and so like he's kind of hit with this like 1-2 whammy of that kind of stuff. And sometimes like if you have deaths that close to one another, or like your grief, just a series of bad things happen, sometimes your mental health takes a long time to like process, or like, so I kind of take it that this first half up until like his house blows up, and it's like him not believing Mike is just like also him in denial and like trying to process the grief, going through his own grieving process of losing these people.
Hear you on that. Makes
Yeah.
sense to me.
I mean, it makes sense if you look at it from that point of view. Yeah.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
But I didn't want to get all bogged up on the logistics. I just, I love sequels, and I love the idea of like how you're going to continue something that clearly wasn't meant to be continued. Like the fact that this came out 9 years later, and I watched the interview, like Don Coscarelli never wanted to do a sequel until 9 years later when he had a new idea. So like the first one was very much supposed to be a contained story, and then now we have 5 of them. So it's like he's like Freddy at this point. The end of our
Yeah.
movie, the one we just watched, spoilers, was the end of every Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Like it was just like I was like, just put Freddy's face on there, and that's the end of all of them.
Well, go ahead,
the
Mark.
way these have played out, it makes you kind of want to keep watching the rest of the series to find out where they go with it and what they can do with the tall man and the whole storyline in general. Plus, it also, the second one plays out where I think, isn't it the original town is now like overrun and in ruins?
Yes. but like I think the way that this film's like pacing of the last act, like the last act is just like a crazy like funhouse
Love
exploration.
it.
Like you're
Yeah.
just like, what is gonna happen next? And when they get into like when they finally get into like that white room from the first film, and you have like all of like the bins of like that the dwarves are just kind of like um hibernating in, and they see like the entryway there, like I was like, okay. And then I checked the time and it's like, oh, we only have 10 minutes left. Like feels like it's the beginning of something. And so like the next one in the series is called The Land of the Dead, I think. Um, but like having that like makes me think that like we're gonna probably spend the majority of the next film like exploring the tall man's world, because we've these sequels, this sequel like explores like continues to explore like the tall man in our world. It really opens up the mythology and like says like, so like you have like characters like Liz and Mike that have this like psychic connection to the tall man. You don't know why, but it's very clear established um that they have some sense of connection to him in his world.
And Liz was the blonde girl they open up the movie to, right?
Hmm.
Okay. So can we talk about the scene where they find her in the basement with the evil Jawa coming up out of her back? That was crazy.
Yeah. That was some of
One
the
of the
thing
best
level
scenes.
effects I've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why
I
like
like
the effects are so good. And this Greg Nicotero worked on this, you know, he would go on to crush it in the industry. But yeah, that effect was
That was
fantastic.
absolutely amazing.
And they just torch it. Even their weapons, the quadruple shotgun. I mean, come on. How often have you seen that? I haven't.
never. Yeah.
And I love that it like realistically had one shot. Like he wasn't reloading it and shit. Like he was like, yeah, if you rig that together, you got one time to use it.
Well, I
Yeah.
thought, if I remember right, he just duct taped together 2 double barrel shotguns.
Yeah, exactly. And then he put like a handle in the front of it so he could kind of steady it.
Yeah.
And then of
I
course four Jawas come out at the same time. Sick.
I
I really believe they recycled Jawa costumes. If they
I
didn't,
mean it
that was
also
I
like
did research on the first movie. They said it came out so close to Star Wars that there was no like they were already making it by the time Star Wars came out. So they were like, it's a weird coincidence they weren't copying Jawas.
really.
That's what they
yeah.
say.
It, what I think is really interesting, like about the effects in this movie, I think they're gnarly. I think they're like real sick. Like
They're
you brought
they're
up,
solid traditional
yeah,
effects.
that particular scene with like discovering Liz in the basement and having that back piece come out like reminds me of, I don't remember which nightmare it is, but the nightmare where they see Freddy as a snake. It kind of reminds me
Oh yeah, that's the
of
third one.
that, like, yeah, like, and I was like, man, I was like, this makes me want to watch like Nightmare on Elm Street now. Like, it's such a
Yeah,
solid, like, good effect there, and like, it's honestly just like some like creativity, like, you brought up, the 4 barrel shotgun, like the flamethrower, like. There's just a lot of things that like you don't
that's that
typically
Evil
get
Dead
to
2
see.
aspect. I feel like
Exactly,
you know,
yeah.
it's cousins to the chainsaw arm. You know, like it's
They
very
just
similar.
they've done, between the first one and this one, they've done so much correct. And we
I,
still have 3 more to go.
I appreciated the amount of guns in the series too. Like even the first one, how they keep grabbing rifles. I'm like, yo, people in horror movies never grab guns. Like it always happens in rural areas. Someone's got a gun. They should be like. I
Yeah,
appreciated them just constantly loading up, putting ammo in their pockets, and they're like, yeah, I gotta shoot this evil out of here.
I still like the MacGyvering the key in the first one. That was
Oh,
fantastic.
that
Yeah,
God is so good. Yeah.
With the
that was
thumbtack
awesome.
and the shotgun shell and a hammer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was sitting there. I was like, would that work? I was like, I feel like you might blow
Oh,
your
it'll
hand off,
work.
but yeah,
It'll work. Yeah.
I feel like you
Not
might
gonna,
lose a finger potentially.
not
Coming
gonna tell you
soon to
how
a
I know it'll
Biscayne.
work.
Mark will do it.
Oh
Not
no.
turn away.
Well, okay. I know a little bit about firearms. So the firing cap in shells, in shotgun shells and bullets, in a gun, your firing pin hits it and it sparks. It ignites the shotgun shells,
Ah,
or ignites the gunpowder.
yeah. Okay.
So in theory, yeah,
Yeah.
it would work. The thumbtack would hit the firing cap, blow the spark, hit the gunpowder, and make it work. It would
Wow.
work theoretically. But you'd also have an explosion in your hands too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I am kind of like coming back to the subject of Liz. There are so many sequences in this where like she's got like tape over her mouth and they're trying to silence her, which I didn't fully understand. And I'm like curious to if you guys like have any thoughts or theories on that because like there's a scene in here between Mike and Liz where like they establish that they have the psychic connection to where they can just literally look at each other and talk with their minds. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it felt like uh
I didn't
counterproductive to like tape her mouth.
I didn't know who she was. There at the beginning, it was like, who what? Who's this character?
She's a new
There's
character. They establish it.
she's just a new character, right? But there's no connection to her to the first movie. So when it opens up the movie to her, kind of retelling the story, oh, this happened, that happened. It's like, is this his sister? Is this who the crap is this? It left me a little confused at the beginning, even though she was a new character. There was no tie to her to the first movie.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I didn't the tape thing, now that you mention it, Josh, it doesn't really make any sense to me because I didn't think about the telepathicness. I literally just thought it was like, I don't know, she's tied up. They put the tape over her mouth so she wouldn't make a lot of noise. But now that you bring it up, that doesn't really like if her power is telekinesis,
Yeah,
taping the
and
mouth's
like
not going to do much.
it's also like I don't know. Like I would like every time they would like show her because it happens like 2 or 3 times in the movie, and I'm just like this just seems like a weird like narrative choice to like say, hey, we're gonna put tape over your mouth and it's to silence you because like literally she can do anything.
Also,
Like I
I
mean,
thought that they were gonna have a grand plan for her because there was that one time where the tall man catches her halfway through the movie and he's like, "Hello again" and goodbye, and then throws her and walks away. So I was like, "Oh, he must have a grand plan. He doesn't want to kill her." But then later they're just putting her in the crematorium thing. So I was like, "There's a lot of times where he definitely could have killed them and he didn't." And I was just like, "All right."
I I would be curious to see if like Liz has a larger part to play in here because a lot of the choices that they make with her character feel really weird in this.
Yeah.
Um Also like can we talk about the subplot of Reggie and the hitchhiker speaking on the subject of weird because
Oh, Kemi, the weirdest name in the movie.
like it just kind of seems like they're like, you know what this movie needs? Sex.
Oh yeah.
That's it.
Boobs, blood, and bad decisions.
The pinnacle of 80s horror. But they never show her like I don't think they show her boobs in this movie.
Yeah, they
I don't
do.
remember
Yeah, they
seeing
do.
it because
In that
do
sex
they?
scene where she's like rubbing on his head and like she's
Yeah.
Which
really
is
into
such
his
a
bald
weird
head.
like out of every scene in this movie, in these two movies, the weird sex scene in this is like probably the weirdest because like also as a fellow bald guy, like I feel like I would be turned off if like my wife did something like that to me and she's just like
Also,
rubbing
yeah.
it like an 8 ball.
Also, as a bald guy, that doesn't really happen. There's very few. You're not gonna meet. It's very rare you're gonna meet a girl who's like, "Oh my god, like my thing is bald heads."
I mean, I don't
uh,
know anything
I,
about that issue, so
I was talking to my buddy who'd only seen the first movie, and I was watching the second one. I was halfway through, and he called me, and I was like, he's like, "How is it?" I was like, "Hey, it's good." I was like, "You remember Reggie, like the ice cream man, the bald ice cream man?" I was like, "In this one, he's got like a quadruple barrel shotgun, and he's having sex with straight tens. Like it's a real transformation." Like I was like, he just becomes Arnold Schwarzenegger all of a sudden. Like he was just like an ice cream man. Like,
but he's got like a horseshoe mullet with a ponytail.
yeah,
Yeah.
but he
It's
makes it work.
fantastic.
He does
He
make
makes
it
it
work. And like
I love
that's
him.
one of the things that like I really appreciate about this movie is that there is like you're actually seeing the evolution of these characters. Like it's not like they didn't grow from like the first film to the
Yeah,
second film and I think a large part of that comes from uh the
Casarelli probably.
yeah, Casarelli because like
I don't know.
I,
I'm just guessing.
yeah,
That
like
guy.
I think it comes
The
from him
Don,
like
yeah.
like Chucky's like another like Chucky and Andy, Barkley from the Child's Play movies up until the recent season of Chucky, like I think having someone else other than Don Mancini, like you don't have that thoroughness that you have and that evolution of those characters. And I think that's really what also makes this film work is that Reggie feels older and wiser and like he's matured. And then you also have that with Mike, and the two just have this really great, solid relationship that really seems to like have evolved from them. And I think it comes back to the subject of grief and how like when you grieve together, there's this process of like also growing together.
Yeah, I agree. And that's actually the reason why I'm excited to keep watching these, because at first I had no idea. I just assumed this was like most horror franchises where each movie is a clean slate. It's like a Leprechaun or something where you just turn a phantasm on, it's a new set of characters. But knowing that it's similar to Chucky, where it's the same writer director throughout the whole franchise, the same cast for the most part, I'm real excited to kind of keep going. And full disclosure, it's the reason why I said I wanted to do Phantasm 2, because I thought these might suck. So I didn't when you asked me which one do you want to do, and I was like, I don't want to pick five, and then all of a sudden I'm watching 1 through 4 and having a miserable time. So I picked 2 just in case I didn't like it, but I do like it. So going forward, I'm excited.
I feel like it's an overlooked, missed franchise at
Yeah,
this point.
definitely. And
It,
what do you guys feel about the recasting of Michael? Because apparently he comes back in the other movies, the original actor.
Yeah, so this is an interesting fun fact. Apparently, very early in his career, Brad Pitt actually auditioned for the role of Mike.
That's mad funny. Well, probably in the first movie, right?
wow.
Or this one?
No, in
Oh
this
no, might have
movie,
been. Yeah, yeah,
Phantasm.
yeah. He would have been. Yeah, he would have been like 60s, 70s.
Um, I'm always like, I always think it's really like, I don't know how to feel about it because like they did the same thing from like, they did the same thing with the original Andy Barclay actor. Like he's in 1 and 2, and then like skipped over the third one, and then comes back for Curse and
So,
Colt and
yeah,
series and Alex Vincent. But I don't know. Like I think this actor did he did a fine job with it. Trying to look up his name real quick.
I know.
Uh, James LeGros.
Without seeing the original kid older, like I need to compare 3 to this one to see who I think is better. Because the kid was a kid in that first movie, so you can't really judge him against the adult version of this.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think he does a great job in the first film. I think he's one of, I think he really sells the part, and it's but he also kind of like comes into this like golden age of horror where like you're able to have, teenage actors and be really impactful. Like you look at other films like Stand By Me, Lost Boys, Gremlins, these like age of like even like later in the 90s, like The Faculty is like another great example where like having a really solid cast, um, and really brings your movie to life. And I think LaGrosse does a great job here. Um, Curious what your guys' thoughts are. Well, I guess Mark.
Yeah, I think he did a decent job to replace the old actor.
Yeah, I
He,
looked it up. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
oh no, you're fine. Go ahead.
Apparently, yeah, because both Reggie and that the kid from the first movie, they both didn't act after Phantasm 1. Like Reggie, his first,
Interesting.
he was in Phantasm, and then for 9 years he has no credits, and then he's in Phantasm 2. And so the studio basically was like, they told Don Casarelli, you can't have both your leads be people who aren't actors, like who aren't currently in stuff. And
Sure.
so they made them both audition, and basically Reggie passed the audition, and the kid from the first movie didn't, and that's
Yeah,
that's what happened.
interesting.
Yeah, so
That's
it was basically
wild.
like they were like, look, we need, because LaGrosse or whatever his name is, he was in other movies at that time. He was a working actor, and neither of these other guys had done anything since Phantasm 1. So they were just like, we can't give you $3 million with no actors in your movie.
Well, when you think back, and I think what's working in Phantasm's favor is we've done a ton of slashers and all kinds of
Mhm.
different movies, and when you think back to stuff like, was it the Burning or whatever, the Weinstein slasher, and some of these
Yeah.
other older movies, nothing really stands out about him. Black Christmas had what's her name that was in the Superman movies later with
Margaret
Christopher.
Kidder.
Yeah, Margot Kidder. Yeah, and you remember her because of that. But not Halloween, you remember Michael Myers. You remember some of the scenes throughout the Halloween series. Freddy, you remember Freddy and all his jokes and gags. And this one, you remember the tall man, you remember the Sentinels, and you remember some of the weird junk that goes on in these movies, where so many others before it and even after were just forgettable and interchangeable.
I disagree with your analysis on Black Christmas. I think what helps that film is the fact that you never really get to see the killer, and whereas a lot of other slashers in that age like were front and center, that really kind of messed with you. That is like still to this day, even almost 50 years removed from that film, that that ending still gets me every time. And but I just wanted that to be on the record that I disagreed with Mark.
Well,
Um,
the point was is that there's a lot to remember from this series where so much before it you don't.
I think that's like to like we keep coming this comparison of Hellraiser because Hellraiser is a film also from this time that stands out because it's not like a lot of other films. It has a lot in common with Phantasm, but I think the reason that I would compare it to that is because like most people would argue that Phantasm and Hellraiser basically have a a character that you remember, tall man, pinhead, and then you have a shaped box slash weapon, the
The
sphere, the
Sentinels.
sentinel, and then you have the lament configuration, and there's a bunch of like weird mythology that goes along with it. But I think for this series in particular, we're only two films in. I think what helps it in its favor is that each film thus far feels completely different from one another. And I don't know if that this is because like this had a studio budget, this had like studio mandates that went along with it that how to make it feel like that borderline action 80s kind of adventure film a little bit, whereas the first film just kind of feels like it's a really unique character study that delves into the weird. Um, but it's not as weird as you think because I would argue that this film, the exploration and the expansion of the mythology is leaps and bounds uh, stranger and more unique than the first film.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Well, if I remember commercials correctly, I think we're leading up to Sentinels the size of like buildings in one of the later movies.
And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about this film. And it like, we talked about the practical effects earlier, but this getting the different types of Sentinels in this movie was a real treat. Like the the dead butler that was like trying to like operate on Liz when he gets the Sentinel, like,
The
and they
gold
reveal it,
signal.
like, yeah, the gold
Oh, that
Sentinel,
was the
like,
greatest kill
and you
I've
just
seen in
like
ages.
you just see that
That's
like
what I'm saying is like I don't know how this isn't
so
talked
good.
about simply from like a practical effects standpoint. The way the way we talk about The Thing and all these other movies from the '80s, this should be up there with that. These effects were,
Yeah.
regardless of the movie. Like I didn't think the movie was the strongest as a whole, but
Sure.
these effects. That's why I thought the end was the greatest thing I'd seen in ages. It was just
They're
a
fantastic.
beautiful showcase of how practical effects work.
The
And like,
blood fountains.
yeah, even when the priest gets his ear ripped off, like that was
Yeah.
just like these little things. And this isn't really a crazy effect, but I liked how this movie also added a little bit more religion to the kind of stew. And that scene with the priest when he's choking him with his own rosary beads, and then he takes the cross, and then it turns upside down into the Antichrist symbol. I thought that was just like that was in terms of visual storytelling. I thought that was one of the strongest moments in the entire movie.
And
Yeah.
they also give you an idea of how strong the tall man is too. Because
Mhm.
he gets got by one of the sentinels
Yeah,
and just
Yeah.
like pulls it off after a minute or two.
So like this is one thing that I had questions about, but that scene in particular, Andy, I'm really glad you brought it up because like that priest is praying and the tall man like doesn't have a whole lot of lines, but he says, "You think you go to heaven, but you come to us."
yeah,
And like we get to kind of explore his world outside. And I'm almost kind of curious if this is like you know, like Don Casarelli's like version of like hell, and like all of the psychic kids are like angels that have like a a connection like to like a much larger like being or entity that is kind of like the antithesis of the tall man. And so I'm almost kind of curious if this is like really building up to like a mythology that has a religious undertone to it.
might definitely might. Because I
I
didn't I
guess
didn't catch too much religious stuff outside of the cemetery and the use of kind of like it didn't talk about religion like the same way this scene did it. I felt like in the first movie.
And
well they were showing in the first one the corpses were being brought back as the evil minions,
yeah,
Yeah,
as the
but
evil Jawas. In this one, they were more grotesque.
yeah, I
And
think
in the
I some of
it,
that I think is the budget.
yeah,
yeah,
I think
and
so too.
so I do think that little bit of a change wasn't necessary. I almost like the fact that when they knocked the hood back on one in the first one, it was the face of like the dead friend from the beginning or whatever.
Yeah,
So this is
I think
my
they did that
theory.
a little
Go
bit
ahead,
with this
Andy.
one though, because the grandma that happened with one of the kid the lady was like grandma when she pulls back the mask of one of the I'm gonna keep calling them Jawas, but
Yeah,
let
there's
let
a
Disney
This is
sue me.
what they look
But
like.
sorry if you get a copyright claim on this from Disney on this podcast because I said Jawas.
yeah. There's a so I'm probably the only one crazy enough to read the actual like Stephen King's like novel It, but
Oh, I've read
okay.
it.
So in the mythology of it, it's revealed like in the I feel like half a little over halfway through the book that like Pennywise is actually like that universe's like version of Satan, and there's a giant like turtle that actually is like their version of God. And I'm almost kind of curious if that's kind of like the similar like way that they're kind of building up the relationship between the psychics and uh the tall man. That's kind of what I felt like during some of those religious scenes because like he's essentially like building an army like with all of the bodies that he's walked, because there's two scenes that we see in this movie where Mike and Reggie are walking through completely uh dug up graveyards, and they're kind of like exploring um that like I don't know how to describe it, but it's almost kind of like a house, but it feels kind of like a kind of like a Freemason hall in the first graveyard where they like come in and like the cross is kind of like got barbed wire all over it. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Sorry,
I
are you
don't
talking about the first
remember.
movie or in the beginning?
This one.
Oh, okay.
The it's there's a scene where Mike and they're trying, it's like really early on in the road trip, they're trying to find the tall man, and in the process of finding him, they go to this graveyard and they walk through it, and then they get into this like hall that almost feels like very reminiscent of like Freemasons, or like just, you know, like a secret society. And
Yeah.
one of the scenes that they see is they're kind of exploring, it's like candlelit hallways, but they also kind of come across that cross that has like the barbed wire on it.
Mm-hmm.
On a side note, have you looked at Cos or whatever the crap that guy's name is that none of us know how to pronounce? Have you looked at his credits?
I only
I
know
was gonna
Bubba
say
Hotep.
Danny Boy, Donny Boy.
I just know Bubba Hotep and then these
Yeah,
movies. That's it.
yeah,
He
that's
also
it.
did the Beastmaster. He did was
Sick.
it John Dies at the End?
Oh
And
yeah, I remember that
yes,
movie.
there's some production work on Bubba Nosferatu that's a prequel to Bubba Hotep.
But that's never been made. They've been talking about that for like a million years.
It's
I'd love to
being
see it.
listed. Oh yeah, it's being listed as upcoming as story as writer and director for him.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, it's called Bubba Nosferatu. It's supposed to be a prequel to Bubba Hotep.
Oh, sick.
So his movies are like far between too. Like he goes long gaps without doing
Yeah.
anything, and then he puts out these movies like the Phantasms and Beastmasters and stuff.
Yeah, I feel like he's like almost like Terry Gilliam. He's got like really a very unique filmography. Pretty cool.
Yeah,
Sorry, I got sidetracked a little.
not a no, you're fine. Yeah, his credits are like really sporadic because like I have his IMDb page pulled up now, but
Yeah,
it's wild to me. Um, but uh, yeah. So here's two fun facts about the actor that played Reggie, also named Reggie Bannister.
Yeah,
He
I
did
noticed
all of
that.
his own stunt work for the film, except the scene where he has to jump over the chainsaw. They would not let him do that.
Yeah, I mean, I got to
oh, but
imagine.
somebody else could. Yeah,
Yeah.
Here's probably the most uncomfortable fun fact. I've said this entire episode. His wife was actually present on the day that they shot the sex scene with actress
But
Samantha Phillips.
he was like, he's
how do you explain that to your wife later? I really didn't know it was coming, dear.
like, we're gonna be doing a lot of
Figuratively
bald.
and
We're gonna be
literally.
doing a lot of bald play. I don't know if you're familiar with what that is, but it's made up for this movie.
We're gonna need you to go get coffee between this time and this time.
Yeah, that's how I knew the first one was an independent movie without even looking it up, because I saw that Reggie's actor's name was Reggie and Mike's actor's name was Mike, and I'm like, that shit only happens in independent movies. Like, like you guys aren't actors. It'll be easier. Like you'll look up if we say your
Collectively
real
by your
name.
names.
Yeah, they don't have the training to get a new character.
I'm also curious, is so there's a moment in the last act of this movie. It's like one of the last times that the tall man is on screen. Is like, do you guys take it as like the tall man like has the ability to be a shapeshifter? Because like there's
Well,
that scene where he moves from like being like, I think he was Liz at one point. He's someone else, and then like camera like pans away and it comes back and it's him.
yeah, because I think they established that in the first one. Every time when the girls have sex with someone and kill them, isn't that him? Because I thought that was
Yeah,
established.
that's
So yeah,
fair. Okay, cool.
which is also hilarious just for him that he has to be like, I must go seduce these men and get really close to orgasm and then kill them. It's just a hilarious thing that he has to do.
Look, man, not
Is
to
it
kink shame anyone. He's
Oh, I'm not.
clearly
It's
an
just
is
like
it
edge play here.
when you have an
is
evil plan, but you're also like, yeah, that's part of it. It's like, no,
well, I
trust me, it's
mean,
important. It's the only way. It's the only way I can kill them.
I gotta be really sexy, you know.
Yeah.
Just get really close to that big O.
Yeah, like they
You
couldn't
know,
just
take it away.
is it that he's shape shifting, or is it that he's screwing with their mind? Because they've already proved he can do that.
Oh yeah, it might be that too.
That's also really fair too. And I mean, like, to be fair, like, I mean, the
What's
first
the biggest
film,
distraction to most guys? It's
Yeah,
going to be a
exactly.
hot chick.
I mean, it
yeah,
works. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you're also like in this transition for the first film where you're coming out of like the summer of love, so like sex was kind of becoming like a more predominant. And then in the 80s, we've already established that like the triple B, one of those happens to be boobs. So,
Yeah.
again, it like doubles down, especially with slashers. Like slashers, a part of the formula was like, gotta have a sex scene. Like it became synonymous with like Jason and a couple of like especially a lot of like the like direct to video uh, slasher boom of the 80s that is like teenagers gotta have sex and
Yeah,
it's
pre-internet, and if you
yeah,
didn't want to be judged for buying porn in public, this is the only way you could do it while still looking like a normal person.
sure.
You'd be like, um, I caught two Easter eggs in the movies. You guys catch any others? I mean, they were pretty blatant, but when they
The
were digging
Sam
up the
Raimi.
graves, yeah, the Sam Raimi was towards the end when they're. I didn't catch it though on IMDb. It was an extra level. They're dumping ash into Sam Raimi's bag, so it's a double Easter egg that they're putting ash in there. But one of the empty graves when they're digging up graves, it said Alex Murphy, and it was a RoboCop reference. And I didn't pay attention to the movie for 6 minutes because I was like, "Is the tall man building RoboCops? What the fuck's he doing?" And it made me
Wow,
laugh.
did not catch that. That's a
Yeah,
deep cut right there.
I
I
know Alex Murphy. I
really,
looked.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I
it
re-
was 1 year after, so they were just like, "We love Paul Verhoeven. Put Alex Murphy in the in the grave."
That's awesome.
I
Yeah,
really need to go back and rewatch 1 and 2, just because I feel like I missed so much of 2 having issues that night.
yeah, yeah. But I thought maybe there might have been some other ones that I didn't catch, but I saw those for sure. The Sam Raimi one was so blatant; it was right in front of. Like I paused it, I was like, oh, "Look at
I was
that."
like, Mr. Sam Raimi. I was like, oh, that's what a nice Easter egg to go there.
But I
I mean,
mentioned it earlier when the Sentinels chasing them and breaking down the doors from the camera's point of view. That was right out of the cabin in Evil Dead 2. Like that
Oh
to me
yeah.
seemed like he was just like tipping his hat to Sam Raimi.
I almost want to see what they do with more Sentinels. Are they
Yeah,
going to stick to
I'm
the silver
curious.
one and the gold one, or are they going to come out like more advanced weaponry, or how
I
is
I'm
that
just
going to work in the
I'm
sequel?
worried that the concepts will get greater, but the budgets will get smaller, so it's gonna like not look that good. That's what I'm worried about, but we'll see.
don't know. I think I as someone that watches a lot of independent movies, I think you can get really creative
For sure.
with those films and like kind of like the gags and like the spin on it. I mean, like the concepts alone in the first film with the Sentinels are pretty basic, but they work really well. And I
Oh yeah.
think that like the evolution that you have here with the Sentinels, it's very minor, but it looks presents some of the best moments in the film. And I genuinely like that because I'd like the one where like it gets him right here and then it opens up like a hose that just kind of like squirts out the
From that
blood
first
and
movie, right? Yeah.
yeah, and I'm just like, man, I'm like that's such a classy like gag right there.
That's what I was saying. Like, as someone who was new to the series, I can't believe I didn't know about the Sentinels. Like, it was such a pleasant surprise in that first movie. I was like, "Hey, that ball's flying," and then all of a sudden it's like, I was just like, "Oh, this is crazy." Yeah, so
That's
that was a
that
great surprise.
pictures of the tall man and seeing the Sentinels all over the place are the two things that I know the most from Phantasm.
Yeah, for me, it was just the tall man. Thankfully, the Sentinels escaped my grasp somehow.
Huh. Yeah, those were the two main things I remember. Even because I knew of the series forever, even when I first started getting into horror, even when I was sneaking and watching it in the middle of the night as a kid, going
Uh
to
huh.
elementary school.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
knew of Phantasm. I knew of the Sentinels specifically. I may not have known that's what they were called, but I knew of them and recognized them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this movie is like it takes the first concepts and really elevates it. And I think that, you know, sometimes for me, like in like the transitions from like horror films from like one to two, they don't always ring out for me. And I've not liked a lot of like horror sequels. Like I hate the transition from like night or Friday the 13th, from one to two. I really don't like certain like ones, uh other ones too, like number twos, but this one I think is a great like stand alongside the first film really well.
think it's just nice with as much horror as we've watched to find something in a franchise that makes you want to watch the rest of the franchise,
Yeah,
as opposed to watching a franchise. Okay, I've watched it, kind of thing. You know what I'm saying?
yeah. And I've been a broken record with this, but I'll always rather watch like one person's vision over time. Even if I don't end up liking it, I still think it's more interesting than when it's just a studio was pumping out sequels, which, like, correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, I feel like that's the later half of Hellraiser where like there's no creative force
Yes.
behind those. It's just like
There's
fuck
not.
it, put another one, and then you end up being like, I don't know.
There's
So
another one that actually came out around this time, and we have the poster behind me. If you guys are supporting us on Patreon, you guys can see it at the $5 level, but it's patreon.com/victims and villains. But Subspecies is a franchise from the late 80s, early 90s. It's one of the best vampire ones I've ever seen, and
I think they did one recently, didn't
they
they?
did, and it's fantastic. They did one earlier this year. It's the fifth one. It's a prequel, but Ted Nicoletti, I think I said that name right, but he did it for Full Moon, and I mean it's just over, the span of like 20 years, like he just 20 or 30 years at this point, but he keeps coming back and just like expanding this lore. And I think that when you have a singular voice directing a franchise, you literally can only go up or plateau. You never kind of go down. I think that's why Chucky has one of the best franchises. I think for a while, that's why Scream was one of the best trilogies. And I think that's why Phantasm has a place among the um the horror pantheons of the 80s to be one of the best series that we've covered thus far.
Well, it took the Don, or whatever you want to call him at this point, Donnie Boy. It took him 37 years to do all 5 movies, 79 to 2016.
yeah, that's pretty wild.
But I mean, also like what we see with we established this earlier this year when Andy and I covered the Evil Dead series, is that Evil Dead, every entry feels different, but there's enough space and time. They're not just making entries into the series for entry's sake. No, they're making movies when they have like a sustainable idea. And that's what I feel like. That's why there's so many gaps between the Phantasm movies. I think that you need them because there's 9 years between this and the first one. There is 6 years between this and the third one, four between three and four, and then
Probably like
there
12, probably.
Five
there's
came out in 2016.
yeah, there's a long period. There's an almost 20-year period between four and five. So it's like I would rather them take their time with that and, have something good to say. Like that's, Andy, you brought this up earlier, but like the sheer fact that like what we're seeing is like he didn't want to make a movie until he had an idea. And if
Yeah,
that idea takes 9 years, it produces like one of the best sequels I've seen in the genre to a really original film.
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
looking forward to watching the rest of them.
yeah. I agree,
Well,
and I take back my. Now I'm like, damn, I should have picked Phantasm 5, and I would have had more of an excuse. Not that I can't watch them on my own, but it just would have been interesting. But it's all good.
well, we will be back next week talking about Phantasm 3, Lord of the Dead, not Land of the Dead, but it's Lord of the Dead, and we'll be back with Melissa Canepp, the writer director behind the short film Torn Together. But Andy, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Instagram at LWIL Podcast, as well as TikTok as well. Or shoot us an email at lwilpodcast@gmail.com. You can find our podcast anywhere you download them.
I know you've been on our show like quite a lot. You were a fill-in co-host for Mark when he was moving earlier this year, but just give us that like one sentence elevator pitch for Love What I Love one more time.
Love What I Love is my wife and I trading places week to week, hosting an episode where we pick a movie that the other one either hasn't seen or doesn't have much connection to, and essentially plead our case for that movie. So it's an hour and a half of somebody gushing about a movie they like, trying to convince the other person and the audience to love it as well. Love what I love.
So you guys can check the links in the descriptions below. But Mark, where can people find you online?
Usually talking to you.
He's quit miniature painting at this point.
No, I've really got a big project I really have to get done, and then I'm gonna start working on display pieces. Because my hope is to possibly make Adepticon next year and enter the Golden Demon. Yeah, I think that would be cool. Even if it's just one model, enter the Golden Demon, possibly if I have time, maybe the Resin Beast. But they're both, you're talking 80, 90, 100-hour paint jobs plus some kit bashing and sculpting and things like that to make it all work.
Yeah.
But yeah, right now I'm not doing much online because I'm just trying to get this project done that I'm working on for somebody else at the moment.
Dope. Well, you guys can catch us wherever you guys get your podcast from. You guys can check out you guys can find me. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can also find my other podcast wherever you guys get your podcast from. That's High Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast. And also too, you guys could also find our support our parent company, Victims and Villains. We are also wherever you guys get your podcast from. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Patreon. And of course, you guys can check out our website to find links to all of that stuff, but most importantly, also our mental health resource library. So until next time, remember, the longer you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you. We'll be back with more Phantasm next week.